A man is sitting in his own vehicle with both of his hands stretched out the window in plain view in the air where everyone can see them. He is wearing the uniform of the United States Army. There are guns pointed at his face, and he says one of the most heartbreaking sentences I have ever heard come out of a traffic stop. He says, "I'm honestly afraid to get out." And the officer's answer? The answer from a man sworn to protect and serve is this: "Yeah, you should be." Seconds later, that soldier, hands still up, is pepper sprayed in the face. What you are looking at is the traffic stop of Lieutenant Caron Nazario, a commissioned officer in the United States Army, pulled over in the small town of Windsor, Virginia. And I want to be very clear about why I am breaking this one down, because it is not just to make you angry. It is because almost every single thing that goes wrong in this video is a lesson, a rule, a line in the law that you need to understand. Because what happened to Lieutenant Nazario can happen to anyone reading this. And the difference between a stop that stays calm and a stop that ends in pepper spray often comes down to who in that encounter actually knows the law. I'm Walter Graves, and I'm going to walk you through this stop moment by moment and show you exactly where the line was every time an officer stepped over it. By the end of this video, you are going to know whether this stop was even legal to begin with, why driving to a lit gas station before pulling over was not the crime they treated it as, why pointing guns at a man over a license plate is a constitutional problem and not just a scary one, and the single most dangerous trap in this entire encounter, a trap that gets people hurt every day, the impossible command. Stay with me, because the lesson buried in this soldier's worst night might be the thing that protects you on yours. Let me start at the very beginning with the reason this stop happened at all, because everything is built on it. The officer said they pulled Lieutenant Nazario over because his vehicle did not have a visible license plate. Now here's the truth, and I always give you the truth even when it complicates the story. That is a lawful reason to initiate a traffic stop. A missing or unreadable plate is a real, minor traffic infraction, and it gives an officer the reasonable suspicion he needs to pull a car over and investigate. So the stop itself, the decision to put the lights on, I am not going to tell you that was illegal. It wasn't. But, and this is the entire case, hold on to what kind of stop this was. It was a minor traffic matter, a plate, the lowest, most routine, least dangerous category of police work there is. And what I need you to watch as we go through this is how a minor traffic infraction got treated like an armed robbery in progress. Because the law does not let an officer's imagination upgrade the seriousness of your offense. The Constitution measures everything an officer does against what was actually happening. And what was actually happening here was a man with a brand new vehicle that had a temporary tag taped inside the rear window. That's it. Remember that, because every escalation that follows has to be justified against that, and not against the action movie the officers apparently had playing in their heads. Now here's the first thing the officers got wrong, and it's a myth I need to kill for you right now, because it could save your life. When Lieutenant Nazario saw the police lights behind him, he did not slam on his brakes in the dark on the shoulder of a rural road. He slowed down, he put on his turn signal, and he continued for a short distance, about a minute, to a well-lit, populated gas station before coming to a stop. And the officers treated that, the act of driving to a safe and lit location, as if it were a man trying to flee, as if it were evidence of guilt. It was not. Listen to me carefully, because this matters for every single person watching. Driving a short distance to a safe, well-lit public place before fully stopping for the police is not eluding. It is reasonable. It is what safety experts and many police departments themselves actually advise people to do, especially at night, especially for women and for anyone who has reason to fear for their safety, because there are documented cases of criminals impersonating police. As long as you acknowledge the officer, slow down, signal, and make it clear you are not fleeing, taking a moment to reach a lit public area is a recognized and reasonable thing to do. So when those officers decided that Lieutenant Nazario's careful, visible signal drive to a gas station was high-risk behavior that justified treating him like a violent felon, they made their first catastrophic error. They manufactured danger that wasn't there. Which brings us to the guns. Because the officers approached this stop, a stop over a license plate, with their firearms drawn, pointed directly at Lieutenant Nazario, screaming. And this is where we move from traffic law into the most serious area of all, the law of police force. Pointing a loaded gun at a person is a use of force. It is a seizure under the Fourth Amendment, and it has to be reasonable. The case that governs every use of force by police in this country is called Graham versus Connor, decided by the Supreme Court in 1989. And it lays out a test, a standard the court calls objective reasonableness. The question is always whether the force was reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, given everything they knew, and the court gave us the factors to weigh. Factor 1, how severe is the crime at issue? Factor 2, does the suspect pose an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others? And factor 3, is the suspect actively resisting arrest or trying to flee? So run Lieutenant Nazario through the Graham factors, the same way a court would. How severe was the crime? A missing license plate, about as low as it gets. Did he pose an immediate threat? His hands were out the window, in the air, empty the entire time. He could not have been more visibly non-threatening if he tried. Was he actively resisting or fleeing? No, he had stopped. His hands were up. He was asking, calmly, what was going on. Every single Graham factor points in the same direction. There was no justification for that level of force. Pointing guns at the head of a compliant, unarmed man with his hands in the air over a license plate is not reasonable. It is the textbook definition of force that does not fit the situation. Now, the officers in this case essentially ran what is sometimes called a felony stop or a high-risk stop. Guns out, harsh screaming commands, treating the driver as an armed and dangerous suspect who must be controlled by overwhelming force. And I want you to understand that those tactics do exist for a reason, and in the right situation, they are perfectly lawful. If officers genuinely have specific information that the person in that car just committed an armed robbery or that there's a weapon and a violent felon inside, then yes, the law allows them to approach with weapons drawn and take control of the scene aggressively because the threat is real and the Graham factors actually support it. That is not what we are objecting to. What we are objecting to is the weaponizing of those extreme tactics against a man stopped for a paperwork problem on his license plate. You do not get to import the playbook for a violent felony takedown into a routine traffic infraction just because you've decided, with no real basis, to be afraid. The tactics have to match the actual articulable threat, and a temporary tag in a back window is not a threat. When officers reach for the most extreme tools in the box to handle the most minor problem on the menu, that mismatch is not just bad judgment. It is the constitutional violation. And now we arrive at the trap, the single most important lesson in this entire video. The thing I most need you to understand, because it is happening constantly and it is getting people hurt. It's what I call the impossible command. Listen to what the officers were shouting at Lieutenant Nazario. One officer is yelling at him to get out of the car. At the same time, the other is screaming at him to put his hands out the window, to keep his hands where they can see them. Stop and actually think about that for 1 second. You cannot do both. You physically cannot open your door and step out of a vehicle while simultaneously keeping both hands raised and visible outside the window. It is a contradiction. It is a command that cannot be obeyed. And here is why this is so dangerous and so legally important. When officers scream conflicting commands at a terrified person, and that person freezes or hesitates or can't figure out which impossible instruction to follow, the officers then treat that frozen hesitation as non-compliance, as resistance, as a justification to escalate even further. They create the failure, and then they punish you for it. So when Lieutenant Nazario, with guns in his face and contradictory orders being screamed at him, did the most rational thing a human being can do, he kept his hands visibly up and asked what was happening. That was not resistance. That was a man trapped between two commands he could not simultaneously follow, choosing the one that kept his hands where they could be seen. The law does not require you to perform the impossible, and an officer cannot manufacture your non-compliance by demanding two contradictory things at once and then blaming you for not doing both. Now, I have to be fair and complete here, because you deserve the full law, not half of it. Earlier, I would have told you about a case called Pennsylvania versus Mims, where the Supreme Court held that during a lawful stop, an officer can order you out of your vehicle. And that's true, they can. So someone might say, well, they ordered him out, he had to get out. But here is what Mims does not do. Mims gives an officer the authority to order you out. It does not give him the authority to point a gun at your head, scream impossible commands, and pepper spray you while your hands are raised in surrender. The power to issue a lawful order is not the power to brutalize you for the few seconds it takes you to safely comply, especially when the orders themselves made safe compliance impossible. An order to step out is a small, lawful thing. What was done to Lieutenant Nazario on the way to that step was not. Because then came the pepper spray, with his hands still up, still asking questions, still not having made a single aggressive move. An officer deployed OC spray, pepper spray, directly into the face of a uniformed soldier whose hands were in the air. And pepper spray, like a gun, is a use of force, judged by the same Graham versus Connor standard we just walked through. So ask the question one more time. Severity of the offense? A license plate. Immediate threat? Hands up, empty, visible. Resisting or fleeing? No. There is no version of those facts where chemical spray to the face is reasonable force. It is, on its face, an excessive force violation of the Fourth Amendment, and it is the most serious line the officers crossed all night. And watch what happens after. Lieutenant Nazario, now sprayed, disoriented, in pain, is given more commands, struck, taken to the ground, and handcuffed. And then comes a part that I need you to pay very close attention to, because it reveals what these officers understood about what they had just done. As things calm, one of the officers essentially tells him that he has a choice, that this can all go away quietly with no charges if he just lets it go, chills out, and doesn't make a complaint. The clear implication being, make a fuss about your rights being violated and we'll pile charges on you and put this on your record and threaten your military career. Be quiet and we'll make it disappear. I want to name what that is, legally, because it has a name. Using the threat of criminal charges to pressure someone into staying silent about police misconduct is a serious problem, and where an officer retaliates against you, or threatens to, because you intend to exercise your rights, to file a complaint, to speak out, that implicates the First Amendment. You have a right to report misconduct. You have a right to pursue a claim. And an officer dangling charges over your head to buy your silence is not offering you a favor. He is showing you that he knows the encounter was wrong, and he is trying to make sure no one ever holds him accountable for it. That moment, that quiet offer to let it go, is often the most revealing moment in the entire stop. And there's one more piece I don't want to slide past, because it ties directly back to why officers are so eager to get you out of your car in the first place. During this encounter, Lieutenant Nazario's vehicle was searched. So let me remind you of the rule we live by, the one that protects your car every single day. An officer cannot search your vehicle just because he pulled you over, just because he ordered you out, or just because he's angry. To search your car without a warrant, he generally needs real probable cause to believe there's evidence of a crime inside, or your voluntary consent. And think about what was actually inside that car: a uniform, a temporary tag, a frightened soldier's belongings. There was no probable cause of any crime because there was no crime. There was a license plate in a window. So unless they could point to genuine, fact-based probable cause, Going through that vehicle was its own separate Fourth Amendment problem, stacked on top of all the others. This is exactly why, on this channel, the words never change. You do not consent to searches, ever, and you make any officer who searches anyway do it on his own authority, so that if that authority wasn't there, the search becomes one more violation a court can throw out. So let's add it all up, the way a court would, because by now the violations are stacked high. A wildly disproportionate show of force, guns drawn over a license plate, impossible contradictory commands, pepper spray deployed on a compliant man with his hands raised, a detention and use of force that the Graham factors cannot justify, and an apparent attempt to trade silence for leniency. This is the kind of case the law has a specific tool for. It's a federal statute, Section 1983, which lets a citizen sue government officials who, acting under color of law, under the authority of the badge, violate their constitutional rights. And Lieutenant Nazario did exactly that. He sued. Now, here is where I have to be honest with you in a way that a lot of channels won't be, because the truth is more useful to you than a fairy tale. You might assume that footage this damning leads to an automatic, enormous payday. It does not always work that way, and this case is the proof. One of the officers, the one who did most of the talking and the spraying, was fired from the department. And when the lawsuit went to a federal jury, the jury did find the officers liable on some claims, but the amount of money they awarded was small, a few $1,000s, and they did not find in Lieutenant Nazario's favor on every constitutional theory he raised. Let that sink in because it teaches you something crucial. Even with body cam footage this clear, even with a victim this sympathetic, winning a civil rights case is hard. The deck is stacked. There are doctrines like qualified immunity that protect officers from being personally sued unless they violated a right that was, quote, clearly established. And juries don't always see it the way you and I see it watching the video. And that is exactly why everything I teach you on this channel matters more, not less. Because if even a uniformed Army officer with crystal clear video has to fight that hard for accountability, then your single greatest protection is never relying on the system to fix it afterward. It is knowing your rights well enough to keep the encounter from going off the rails in the first place, and having the recording to prove what really happened if it does. The footage is the reason we are even talking about this. Without that body cam, it would have been the word of two officers against one man they had just sprayed and cuffed. The camera is the witness that cannot be intimidated. Now let me be fair, the way I always am, and tell you what a lawful version of this stop would have looked like, because the contrast is the entire lesson. The officer sees a car with no visible plate. He puts on his lights. The driver slows, signals, and pulls into a lit gas station, which the officer recognizes as a reasonable safety choice, not a threat. The officer walks up, calmly, weapon holstered, and says, "Evening, sir. I stopped you because I couldn't see a plate." The driver explains it's a new vehicle with a temporary tag in the window. The officer takes 30 seconds to confirm it, maybe writes a fix-it ticket, maybe just gives a warning, and everyone goes home. That entire encounter takes 2 minutes and 0 pepper spray. The difference between that stop and the one we just watched is not the law, and it is not the license plate. It is the choice the officers made to treat a routine traffic matter like a war. So let me turn this soldier's nightmare into your protection. Let me give you the playbook so that if you are ever the one with lights behind you, you know exactly how to keep yourself as safe as possible and your rights intact. Number 1, pull over the smart way. If it's dark or isolated, you do not have to slam to a stop on a deserted shoulder. Slow down immediately, put on your turn signal to acknowledge the officer, reduce your speed to a crawl, and proceed to the nearest lit public place, a gas station, a parking lot. You are signaling clearly that you are not fleeing, you are seeking safety. That is reasonable, and it is your right. Number 2, the moment you stop, make your hands the safest thing in that car. Roll your window down, turn on your interior light if it's dark, and put both hands on the steering wheel, high where they can be seen. Do not go digging in your glove box or reaching under your seat. When you need to reach for your license or registration, Tell the officer first, "My license is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now." You are removing every possible excuse for fear before it can start. Number 3, and this is the lesson of Lieutenant Nazario. If you are ever hit with impossible, conflicting commands, do not panic and do not freeze in silence. Keep your hands visible and say loudly and calmly, "Officers, I want to comply. I cannot do both of those at once. Please give me one instruction and I will follow it." You are doing two things. You are showing you intend to cooperate, and you are putting on the record, on their own cameras, that the commands were contradictory and that you were trying to obey. That sentence can save your life and your case. Number 4, comply with the lawful, do not consent to the unlawful. If you're ordered out of the car during a lawful stop, you get out, calmly. But as you do, the words are the same as always. I do not consent to any searches. You give your documents. You do not answer the fishing questions about where you're going or what you've been doing. Officer, I'm not answering any questions is complete and polite. Number 5, never ever fight back physically, no matter how wrong it is. I know how hard that is to hear watching this video, but you cannot win a physical fight on the side of the road, and trying only hands them the resistance charge they want. Lieutenant Nazario kept his hands up. He did not swing, he did not run. That is exactly right. You survive the encounter, you stay nonviolent, and you win it later, in the daylight, with the footage and a lawyer. Number 6, record and refuse the silence deal. If you can safely record, do it. And if an officer who just violated your rights offers to make it all go away if you stay quiet, understand exactly what that is. That is not mercy. That is a man trying to bury his own misconduct. You have every right to file a complaint, to get a lawyer, to pursue your claim. Do not trade your rights for their comfort. So let me bring it all the way back to that one unbearable exchange. I'm honestly afraid to get out. Yeah, you should be. When you understand everything we just covered, you understand that those words were not just cruel, they were an admission. They were an officer telling a compliant, terrified, uniformed soldier that fear was the point, that fear was the tool. And the entire reason we study a case like this, the entire reason I made this video, is so that fear is not the only thing in that car, so that knowledge is in there too. Because a person who knows the law, who knows the gram factors, who knows the impossible command trap, who knows to seek a lit area and keep their hands up and refuse to consent and keep recording, that person is not powerless in that moment. They are the most prepared person at the entire stop. I'm Walter Graves. If this breakdown taught you something that might keep you safe the next time those lights come on behind you, do me a favor and subscribe, because on this channel, we take the worst things that happen to people at the hands of the people who are supposed to protect them, and we turn them into the knowledge that protects the rest of us. Know your rights, keep your hands visible, keep your camera rolling, and never let anyone convince you that being afraid means you did something wrong. I'll see you in the next one.